Hey everybody, welcome to the SaaS Founder Show. It's Tony Zayas here back for another episode where we talk to SaaS founders who just really get the chance to share their journey and kind of what that looks like as a founder. It's always interesting talking to different people. Today we're talking to Sehreen Noor Ali. She's the co-founder of Sleuth, and Sleuth is a VC-backed startup and recommendation platform for children's health that exchanges data, insights, and directions between parents of children with similar symptoms. So really cool stuff. Sehreen, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
I'm back in an office space, which is like amazing.
Cool. When did you go back?
I actually went back early. I went back in January.
Oh,
so
okay.
There's a co-working space. And as a mom, also, I had to get out of the house to get work done. So it saved me.
Sure, I understand that. Well, very cool. So we usually like to kick off the show learning a little bit about the origin story. So I gave the short description of Sleuth, but would love to hear, where did the idea of the business come from and how did it all come to fruition?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it came from personal experience. So I have two kids, 7 and 4. And my younger one, when she was very little, started exhibiting some symptoms that my doctor just kept telling me to wait and see about. And finally, I pushed for more answers, and it ended up being something that was actually fairly serious. And so serious and not easy. It wasn't like a clear-cut diagnosis. It wasn't something that's like, okay, well, here's a path of treatment and this is what you do. It ended up being that my case and her case were similar to a lot of other parents' case. You kind of think, oh, you're going to get a diagnosis and then everything just kind of, you just check the boxes. That's not true at all. I ended up leaving my job at Kaplan to figure out her care. So it actually required me to leave my salaried job and work full time on her health. And when I was ready to go back to the workforce, I felt really strongly that there was a market, that I was definitely not the only parent who was dealing with this. You know, I would stay up until 3 a.m. on different Facebook groups related to symptoms and conditions and New York City-based ones, and literally like piece together information, just like a sleuth, right? And say, okay, well, let me go pursue this clue. What would that look like? And so I ended up joining a startup generator program at New Lab, which is in Brooklyn. And I met this amazing co-founder, Alex Leeds, and he's a data scientist. And he was about to become a dad, and he had actually been really looking for something in the space of children's health. He had looked at ed tech for a while. And then when I presented this problem, he jumped in and we started talking to dozens of parents. And it just became clear that there's a lot of people like me.
Super interesting. I know kind of that path a little bit of being a parent and getting, that diagnosis that's not clear cut, like you said, super challenging.
Yeah.
Can be super frightening, obviously, frustrating, all of that. So as you, went through that, you were using kind of the Facebook groups and the different places. And like you said, so the name Sleuth come from kind of your approach initially and a service that
it actually took a long time. Okay. We were first called Visible Health, which was always a placeholder. And we learned that Sleuth also means a family of bears. And it really attached itself to this idea of a mama bear and a papa bear, because all the parents we talked about that moment where they realized that they were the advocates for their child. And that's where they came in roaring or, whatever, growling, whatever bears do. And that spoke so much to me also. And it just went so well together.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. So this is a project and a business that comes from a place, I'm assuming, of passion for you, just due to that origin. So that is pretty fascinating. Well, let me ask you, so Alex, you said he was the data scientist that you connected with. Is he on the team?
Yeah. So we're co-founders.
Okay.
And he ran several teams, data science teams at Squarespace. And I think what I have always appreciated about our partnership is how complementary our skill set is and how overlapping our values are. And that has really helped us go forward.
Yeah, and I want to come back to talk about that because a lot of times we talk to co-founders and really find that interesting. Um, Almost all of the time when there's a lot of successes, when there's that harmony because there's the skill sets that are complementary. So I do want to come back to that. But before we do that, I would just like to hear, going back a little bit to the origin story, at what point did you know that this was something not just of interest to you in trying to figure out, learn about, learn from others inside of groups, but you met Alex. When did you guys decide that we have something here, we're going to turn this into a business?
It's a good question. I mean, frankly, I had a lot of imposter syndrome when I was doing this. So it wasn't until I met Alex that I started to think really big. I went into the Generator program knowing there was a market, but not really giving myself permission to think about what the biggest thing could be that we did. And so when we started talking to dozens of parents, that's when I saw Alex light up, that's when I got excited because I was like, okay, it's not just me. Because I had taken such a hit in confidence because I had to leave my job and I live in New York and our identities anywhere. And I feel like, especially me in New York, was tied to our job. So I went from like being an ed tech executive to being a stay-at-home mom. And unfortunately, that term has never been given the respect that it deserves. And so that was me re-entering the workforce when I went to the Generator program. So I kind of felt like, is it just me? Am I like an anomaly? I was one of very few parents in the Generator program. And so it's almost like I relied on his reactions to tell me if I was losing my mind or if I was onto something.
That is interesting. Tell me more about that imposter syndrome. We've heard from other founders touching on this, but part of this really is for other founders who might be at a stage, prior to where you're at, might be going through similar things, right? And so when you say imposter syndrome, what do you mean by that? What were you feeling? And when did you get past that hurdle of feeling that?
It's interesting. I mean, my journey is one of, like a lot of people, just like fighting, just like fighting for your resilience. I had lost my dad the same year that my daughter got diagnosed. And it was just tiring. The workplace was tiring. I was tired. I was grieving. And then I found out my daughter had this situation. And so in some ways, my imposter syndrome was coupled with not giving and I just didn't give an F. Like I was going to go to the Startup Generator program. They were going to either take me or not take me. They were going to accept that I was going to leave at 5:00, not stay for drinks until 9:00. And they accepted me as I am. When I had the interview process with them, I said, listen, I'm a mom. And I'm like, even if I wasn't, like, I'm leaving at 5. Like, this is just not happening. And they took that. So like, I was very confident about what my needs were, but the imposter syndrome came from, I am a mom and a caretaker, and those are the most important things in my life. And can I build a business? And I didn't see a lot of moms like me build a business. I saw a lot of moms, but I didn't see a lot of moms of children who are vocal about their children's needs. I mean, it turns out that, like, by the way, all kids have needs, like they're human. But I have now actually met people who have children who have needs that are, very like extensive needs, and I connect with them the most. It's not about being a female founder. It's not about being South Asian. It's not about being Muslim. It's about being like a mom of a child that has needs, and that's the most important thing to me. And so seeing people in that space who just have caretaking needs that look like mine has helped kind of stem the imposter syndrome.
That's interesting. Your background is pretty interesting from a professional standpoint. I would love to just, if you could tell a little bit about, you worked at the State Department and then your experience in the educational space. And take us through that a little bit. I'd just like to hear, and then I would like to hear how that kind of different mixture of things that you had done, how did that parlay into Sleuth?
Yeah. I grew up in a family that just had a very international orientation. My dad worked in international development, and we lived just outside DC. So like my life was all about like meeting the people in his world that came from everywhere, and I loved it. And so it was like no question in my mind that I was going to do international work after I graduated from Brown. And so that's what I did. I actually moved abroad for a couple of years, and then I came back and worked for the State Department. I think the one thing I learned at the State Department is I need smaller organizations. I loved what I did. You know, I worked with the White House on a lot of different initiatives. I met President Obama. I worked on digital diplomacy tools, which was very new at the time, and it was really, really exciting. But I now can see, looking back, that I needed a lot more room to flex my own creativity muscles. And so when I moved to New York 10 years ago, I knew I wanted for-profit. I wanted a model where you could do social impact, but make money. And so I was very targeted towards ed tech. And so I worked hard to get into that sphere, and then I stayed there. And so those years in ed tech have really informed what I do now, in part because it was, you know, sales, BD, but it was also selling to parents.
That's great. Going back now to talk about, or not back, but moving up to where you were participated and you said a startup generator. I would love to hear about that experience. What was that like? How did you find them? And what did you gain by some of the connections and people that you met along the way?
It was a good experience. I mean, I can say that also because I met Alex there, right? So off the bat, it was a good experience. And then we got investment from New Lab and Antler, and we were the only team to have a unanimous vote for them to invest in us. So it was really great as someone who brought this idea of children's health being underserved and have it validated by people that were mostly not parents. That was really important as a boost. The program itself, I think, is a model that itself has adapted. I think generator programs are probably harder than accelerator programs. And I think, you know, it's a harder business model. I think, though, for the people that participate, it almost ends up being like a good way to experiment with whether or not you have a business idea that you want to take off. I did not get to participate in the social activities, but, you know, like I'd been living in New York long enough. I just kind of felt like I can do what I can do and I can't do what I can't do. So in that sense, it was positive.
Would you mind describing just the difference between a generator program and an accelerator program? I'm certainly more familiar with the accelerator side, but I would like to hear a little bit about the generator.
The generator program was like you don't have an idea yet. You know, you go, you meet together, and the premise of this particular one was to find a co-founder. So it was a lot of speed networking and like founder dating, which is as awkward as it sounds, might I add. And it was really like, who can you work with? And so they would do all these like mock tests or, you know, things that you could do together and see if there was compatibility. Luckily, Alex and I were the first team to meet and stick together. So that worked out very well for me, this idea of like I had come out of a year of basically not socializing with colleagues because I was running to the doctor and to the hospital all the time. And then to like go into it's almost like what everyone's going through now with COVID. I went through once already and I was like, there's so many people. I don't want to like talk to so many people. This is awkward. So I lucked out. But basically you work on an idea together and incubate that idea. And then the investment that you get would really be based on the strength of you and your founder and the idea you have. So of course you have nothing to fall back on because you haven't built the idea yet. So it's really idea zero or ground zero.
Wow. That's pretty cool. So before we talk about that dynamic between you and Alex, I would like to hear, so the startup generator actually offered that ability to raise funds.
Yeah.
So, like, what did that look like? Like, did they grant you enough? What were you able to do with, you know, the brains?
So what we did was, after you paired up with the founder, you worked on your idea, and then you pitched to the committee, and it was a pretty big committee. And then that committee decided if you got the investment. It was a pretty modest investment, but we've made it go far. And so our product right now is built off of that investment. And I think Alex and I have the benefit of having worked on SaaS products before, so we can kind of shortcut the inefficiencies that we had seen previously. So we made it go pretty far.
That's great. And do you guys have any plans to do any further fundraising?
Yeah, we're raising our pre-seed right now, actually.
Okay, great. What is that process like for you as a founder? We've heard from so many that that's almost like a full-time job in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
How has it been for you?
It has been a marathon. I know everyone says that. I find myself a little frustrated with myself, to be honest, because I'm like, oh, I went in with all these assumptions a year ago and I've revised those assumptions. I think that there is a playbook to fundraise. And I think one of those rules is you have to dedicate a lot of time. It really is someone's full-time job. And I think we are so focused on our product and user acquisition that sometimes we probably don't put the attention on fundraising that it actually really needs.
What have you learned through the process you can maybe share with some of our viewers as far as the process of fundraising, and I would say even pitching as well? Is there one tip or suggestion that you would pass along to someone that is in those shoes?
This might be specific to a certain type of business, but we have this really great advisor who felt comfortable telling us, and I'm so grateful, we had talked to him like 4 or 5 times, that basically we have to watch out that people don't look at us as bleeding hearts. Mm-hmm. And that we need to pair our passion for the solution with the signals that we actually do know how to make money, which is kind of funny because I ran revenue for a few startups and we know what we're doing, but I think that was such a key moment for me because I could speak passionately about this all day, but of course, you need to speak just as passionately about the business model, which I do too. And I think the thing is, I was telling a friend in the space, she runs a nonprofit focused on autism. I was telling her yesterday about how our fundraising is going. And I said, I was like, one of the things I've always wanted to prove, we live in a capitalist society. I want to prove that the people that think people will pay. People will pay for a solution that helps their child. And someone once asked me condescendingly why we didn't make Sleuth a nonprofit. And I laid into that person. And I said, we live in a capitalist society. I want you to know that the people who are being underserved will pay for being better served. And I feel very strongly about that. And you can charge an amount that will make us a very profitable business.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. But that is a great piece of advice. I think sometimes people get caught up in a business if it is something they're passionate about, and they have to realize the perspective that they're being looked at by the potential investors and really speak to their motivations and how they're going to make decisions. So that's really great. I would love to hear more about, as you mentioned, you're not the technical founder. That's mm-hmm. where Alex comes in. I would love to hear, it's great that generator paired you guys up, and it sounds like you had strong chemistry out of the gate. I would love to hear how your skill sets work together.
Yeah.
You guys work together, and how the dynamic has changed and evolved over time.
Yeah. It's funny because Alex is kind of sometimes he's like, I guess I'm the technical co-founder, and that paradigm itself is kind of interesting, and that narrative is interesting. But I brought to him this idea of this market. And when we started talking to parents, what we saw was that they weren't getting good information. And as a data scientist, he was like, but this is solvable. Literally, this is solvable. Parents are already sharing information with each other. If you take the information that they're sharing ask it in a way that you get data that's, structured, you can actually do something easily with those stories to get insights and data out of it. So that was something that he brought that I hadn't ever considered, even though I had actually worked on a search engine in education in the first part of my ed tech career. And so he has the vision and knows how to build it with our engineers. I know how to get that out to parents and talk to them about it and garner the trust, right? And so those, like, we work in parallel on both of those things. So, like, I'm constantly talking to parents. I constantly talk about my story. I'm constantly building trust. I talk to nonprofits. I talk to foundations. A lot of those skill sets of diplomacy that I had from my time at the State Department, and really building trust when you have zero money, because that's what the government is. You have to build trust when you have zero money, is exactly this is situation I'm in now. And he's building the product in part based on the feedback that we're getting. So we have this great feedback loop. We also know in fundraising that some people like the other person more. It's just like we can almost predict who's going to resonate with me versus who's going to resonate with him. And so that's been a huge advantage too. I think our relationship hasn't changed that much, honestly. I mean, it's pretty much the same as it was in the beginning, which is we're both fairly seasoned. We're both pretty mature. Like, there's not, we can talk about and disagree about things without it becoming emotional. It's like, it's not a big deal. There hasn't been a time that was like, oh, that's a really big deal,
That's great. I'm going to close the window I have here because there's some construction or something going on.
Oh,
so
sure.
1 second. Okay, so hopefully that's a little bit better. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. To go back to that point of, you said talking to the parents, and I like how you said you felt a sense of like early validation when Alex lit up, when you shared, when the idea. So how did you go about getting those early users, getting that feedback? What did that look like? How did that, process go for you guys?
Our customer development was done on really people replying to a Facebook post that I had shared very early, and then friends told friends. So we got a great segment, like, just to interview. And then we sent out a survey to 1,000 parents, which validated two of our insights. One, that parents would willingly share with other parents, and two, the data that they have is valuable and shows critical outcome data that nobody else has really been using at scale, right? So you think about the fact that it's like we talk about navigational information. Like I've been trained in some like social justice principles, and one of the things I learned was this idea of navigational capital. Some people with privilege have it, and some people don't. So when you think about college and getting into good college, people who know how to get into a good college are navigating a system that is fairly opaque. So they have navigational capital. How do you transfer that knowledge? I think about it similarly with the medical system, right? So people who have a child who have been through it have this information that is immensely valuable to another family who hasn't navigated yet and is new to the diagnosis, right? So that's one type of information that you can extract and share back. But interestingly, the other type of information that you get and can share back is outcomes data. So a lot of children get therapies, speech therapy, occupational therapy, all sorts of therapies. That information about the quantity of therapies and what it's doing to the child is not something your doctors have. Your physicians don't have it. They rely on parent observation to know how much is going on. So we think about the parent as a hub of health information. It's pretty extraordinary because they can say and see that my kid has 5 speech therapies a week, and this is where they are now. So it's like these different types of data that's really critical. And so in terms of acquiring, so we proved that out with our pilot. We interviewed 1,000 parents. We proved with 79% accuracy that you could actually diagnose based on parent stories. We don't diagnose, but you could. And then now I go and I create relationships with a lot of people on Instagram, because parents are sharing on Instagram and on Facebook. And so, it's a lot about the signals of trust, the fact that I am somewhat open about my story, about my daughter. I think people understand that, like, I'm in this because I live it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that allows people to be more willing to open up and share more with you. So that makes a ton of sense. I wanted to get a sense of, as we talk about you and Alex as the co-founders, what is, well, before we do that, I guess where we're at, I would love to.
Sorry, you got cut off. I missed your question.
What did the MVP look like? Because it sounds like, you were kind of working this out. You probably didn't have anything sophisticated early on as most do.
Yeah.
So what did the initial product entail?
So our initial product is a way for parents to share their stories. So they go on Sleuth and they say, share my child's story. Our our product now looks very close to what our MVP did. I mean, we're still pre-seed, right? So we're like better than MVP, which is kind of funny because people do look at our product and think our product is more mature than our stage. And that's all really Alex and his ability to communicate well as a data scientist with our engineers and project that. So it's totally functional right now. Like we just launched developmental assessments, which are tools for parents to see how their children are doing in a couple of different areas. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty good, if I might say so myself.
That's great. And like you said, for people to assume that the product's more mature than it really is, that's a sign that you guys are doing something right, I would say. Very cool. Tell me more about the team. Who are the people in the roles, and what does the team look like right now?
Yeah, so it's me and Alex and our engineers. And what I love about our engineers is that they had a personal motivation for building this, and they understand it empathetically about why this tool would be needed, and have been huge thought partners in the way that we've executed. And so our raise is to then hire a couple of engineers and bring that more in-house.
Very cool. So given those comments that these are people that really, buy into the mission of what you guys are trying to do, how did you and Alex articulate that vision out to find people like that? And how do you continue to do that? We talk with a lot of founders of, the idea of founders have a vision. A lot of times that just exists only starting out in their head. And so to get that not out just to the marketplace, but first of all to your internal team, it's important that everyone can understand and really buy in and make sense of everything. So how did you and Alex go about that? How, what has been your process for, vetting people and bringing them on board? Because it sounds like there needs to be a strong cultural fit. Yeah. Or at least that's, where you're at now, which is great.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a bunch of different things. I think one, we got some early press, so we were able to write out what we wanted to do in text. And I think people really resonate with that. And I think children's health is like a lot of other topics where it's like, if you get it, you really get it. And it's lonely when you get it. So when you see someone else understand it, there's that gravitational pull. So that has been extraordinary for us. And that's how the engineers really they really wanted to work with us. And that meant a lot, that they lived it themselves. In terms of that constant echoing of mission and what we're trying to achieve, it comes out from a lot of written documents. We have a lot of Google documents about like, this is what the product needs to do. This is the functionality. This is why. And we are always in discussion about the parent. We're very user-centered at all points of it. And so like, that's a lot of where my role is, right? Because I'm constantly talking to the parents. I see their stories. I sometimes share with them how stories can be written. And so I keep taking it back. So there's never a moment where we're disconnected from our user. And also, products are hard to build. And I've been in situations where, a leader will get really mad at the product team or like the engineering team, and it just escalates. But I think the thing that our team has is like it's just normal. Like you just talk about it, right? There's like a lot of appreciation that's shared. There's a lot of understanding that mistakes are made or things won't come on time, but like, how do we stay on schedule? And so there's a culture of like, yeah, we're doing this together, things happen, and we're going to keep moving. And we appreciate everyone's contributions, especially during the pandemic. And that's critical.
How are you guys impacted by the pandemic?
I think for me, it was just hard to work while also having kids at home.
Yeah.
And also as a parent and being in children's health, I worry about children right now. Like I worry about my kids' mental health, and that does play on my mind, which is like, do my kids have what they need to get through this? And I think I'm always 2 steps ahead, but I do think about things like what happens when kids go back to school in the fall and the separation anxiety that entails. So that has been the hardest for me. It's like, how do I make sure I'm the mom that's 2 steps ahead while also being the co-founder that's 2 steps ahead? Luckily, there's overlap, so that's great.
Yeah,
but it's tough.
That's a lot. You're taking on a lot of responsibility by asking yourself those questions, which I totally get. That brings me to, we typically ask this later towards the end of this discussion, but just given that you brought it up, how do you, we don't even really talk work-life balance as much on this show because as a founder, it can be so all-encompassing. We like to say more work-life harmony. How do you, how do you fit that in? Being a mother, running a business, how do you, what are the things that you do for yourself to keep yourself, sane and take care of yourself, but at the same time stay, focused and committed to the business?
I don't. I think I am a workaholic, which is probably not, I'm okay with it, honestly. Like, I really like working. I really like what I do. And as long as like the 3 members of my family feel supported by me, that's all I really care about. And I'm pretty good about setting boundaries too. It's not like, every time my kids need me, I'm like there beck and call. Like I do think that it's important as parents to know your boundaries and to help. In my case, like it's important that my kids also foster a sense of independence. And so it's like that constant negotiation. It's like my daughter was like, oh, do you have to go in today? And I was like, yeah, I have to go in today. Like, but I'll stay home for another extra 20 minutes because we had something to do. And so I think it's knowing that it's not about the amount of time often, it's about, are you with that person focused for that time? Because kids know, like if we're on our phone, like I get told off, as I should, right?
Yeah. So being present there, that time that you do spend.
Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sehreen, I would love to hear a bit about just your experience as a founder from the female perspective. We have had quite a few female founders on, and let's face the reality of it. It's a different experience for men versus women diving in in a lot of different ways. How has it been for you? What have been some of the challenges or hurdles you've gotten past?
It's a good question. I think mostly it comes from the realities of being a mom, but I feel actually fairly supported in New York City. I have friends that are female founders that have different experiences than I do, but I'm a part of a lot of different supportive networks where it's the norm to be a female founder. I get more on the race stuff than I do on the female stuff. The female, I think, to be totally blunt, the fact that like Alex is a white guy probably buffers a lot of the bias I would get.
Yeah.
But I have been in some situations where people like say what they think is funny race stuff, which is just silly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you would say that's been a bigger, issue to deal with than, as being a female?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's not because I don't think it's harder to be a female founder. I truly think it's because my partner is a guy.
Sure.
Right. And so that's obvious to anyone, right? When I talk or like when they see our deck. So I don't stand alone in that identity because I'm paired with it. And so then people look at us as like, oh, they're, you know, they look at, even though Alex is a parent, they look at me as a parent who's living the situation. And they look at Alex as the person who understands the data science of it. And so, I mean, I think that's also a lesson, right? Like people, you are judged as a pair oftentimes. And I think people will try to take that into account. If I was building this with another female, I think my experience would be very, very different. Right? Because then you're overweight on that identity. And I think I would be penalized for it. But because we're also, you know, our user base is moms, that works.
Yeah.
And I do think the thing that has hurt me most as a female founder is the fact that I'm so passionate about the inequities in children's health, and people do look at me as a bleeding heart. I think that is the number one thing that has hurt me, right? So like if I were a male with a bleeding heart with that, I don't think I would. And like we've had VCs literally say to us, I love what you're building. It's just so nice to talk to people who are like trying to make impact in the world too. And I got off those calls being like, I'm not here to make you feel better that you talk to someone that cares. You know what I mean? It's like, that's the kind of stuff that I think is this implicit bias that is because I'm a female.
Sounds somewhat condescending in that context, right? To get
very condescending.
No, that's fascinating. Do you have any suggestions for someone who's feeling the challenges of being, you know, a woman, a minority, whatever it might be, but they have this vision, they have this, you know, idea? What do you say to them? How do you confront this and deal with I mean, it's a reality, right? Like you said, there's going to be these prejudices that, you know, surface. Hopefully over time we see less and less of that. But the fact is this is what we're dealing with. Any suggestions for, you know, people out there that are going through something like that?
Yeah, I have two suggestions. One, find your people, and they're probably in some of these networks. It's not a network that is going to be the solution. It's going to be the 2 or 3 people there who really understand what you're doing. And I think being able to say like, hey, this happened, was that normal? And they're like, no, that just sucks. It's just bias in the system. Like, I hear you, right? So it's like those 2 or 3 people who are sounding boards. And I think the second would be make sure you're spending a lot of time with people who are not founders, like the other people in your life that love you, that like are supportive of you, that you're, you know, creating this startup, but knew you before you did it, right? Because that's a huge reality check. Like I have a good support base of people who just really believe in me, but probably know nothing about technology.
I'm trying to recall what exactly you said towards the beginning of this conversation, but it was something along the lines of like knowing the game that you're playing and being okay, like playing that game.
Yeah.
Does that come into play at all? Because to me, that's what I hear. It's like there are, like you said, you have that person that you're close with that you can connect and share things with that you found through that network. And they could say, no, that's not normal. It just sucks. Right. Yeah. So the fact sometimes is you're going to deal with things that are kind of bullshit. Right.
Yeah, totally.
You have to realize that that's part of the game.
Yeah.
I have to figure out a way to get past it.
Yeah. I think,
dwell on it and feel, you know, there's all this injustice and let that teach you.
It's hard. Like I am a person who has a very strong sense of self. Like I am the same person I was 10 years ago than I am now. Like my best friend will tell you, you didn't change when you got married. You didn't change when you got kids. Like I know who I am.
Yeah.
And what makes it hard is that I don't like playing games. And what makes it even harder is that I realize I have to adapt, right? So while I know who I am and I know I would, you know, I kind of feel like metaphorically I am on a stake saying, listen, here's a market and you can make a lot of money, right? The fact that I've been working on this, not taking a salary, you know, it's a sacrifice to start a startup. But also there are just ways that this game is played, and I have to adapt. And I'll give you an example. I say this to a lot of my advisors. I'm not popular. Like, I'm not cool. I'm not that like cool female founder, whatever. It's like, it's just not me. I just don't care, you know? And that is going to hurt me unless I adapt. And, I am so committed to this business that I will adapt to a certain extent. And I'm like actually totally fine with it now.
You think your attitude along the lines of not caring all that much about perception, perhaps, do you think that's also an asset to you? Because what I'm getting is that you not only just have a strong sense of self, but that's probably the foundation for a lot of confidence. And
yeah, it is
a superpower of yours. Just that's what I'm reading from just talking with you this hour.
It is a superpower. And I will say something a little controversial. People don't like confident women. Not everybody likes a confident woman. And that sucks. Right. And it's almost like you got to find the people who think your confidence is an asset, because not everyone is going to think your confidence is an asset. And I tell my, it hurts. It really does hurt when people try to put you down because you're confident. But then when you think about it, it's a great self-selecting mechanism, right? It's like, I am coachable. I'm 100% coachable, and I'm confident. And like, there's just a lot of nuance about creating a business. And I've found that the people who have started their own businesses before, who've been down this road, they get that. I think that people who are newer to this and are trying to play a certain like startup VC playbook are a little bit more threatened by that.
Yeah, and I think that's fantastic, just that you have that sense of confidence. I do believe it's a superpower, and I completely agree with your controversial statement. Totally true. I'm a girl dad. I have an 11-year-old daughter, and I have a wife who is very confident, to the point that we always joke about this. We once had a carpet installer come in years ago, and just they were exchanging stories, and we both used to live in Southern California, and kind of struck up, found out that he used to be a professional bowler. And my wife jumps in and says, I'm a really good bowler. And afterward, I'm like, honey, you realize that this is a guy, I don't know how much of a bowler you are. I'm not much of one, but you're a professional bowler. You're like really good.
Yeah, I love it.
And we joke because that's how she brings that to kind of everything she does. And that's something that I love that my daughter gets to see. And I truly believe that that is one of the most important things. And as a parent, my job is to have a kid who, beyond anything else, believes in themselves. And that is one of the biggest superpowers. In particular, for women, that's just the way I see it. And I do agree with your statement. And again, I've seen that, play out in talking to my wife, just saying, there are people that are just not going to like how strong, how confident you are. And that's, to your point, self-selecting. You find your people, and I think it works out for the best, in my opinion, even though it might be difficult in those moments where you're trying to win somebody over that is a little bit threatened by you, and you don't really understand that. Really fascinating stuff. I would love to hear, you mentioned a little bit about kind of the network, and just like support resources. I would love to hear about mentors you have. You had a very successful career prior to launching this business. I would love to hear who are some of those people that, you lean on and you look to, because we found that, mentors are a really important part of growing a successful business.
Yeah. I think most of my mentors are informal, like they're former colleagues that I worked with at mostly my technology jobs, my ed tech jobs. There's one startup I was at, and I've kept up with a lot of the people. And I started a network called Ed Tech Women, and that has been a great resource of mentorship for me, because it's not active now, unfortunately. But when I was building it, the thing that I loved the most was how intergenerational it was, in terms of where people were in their career. So I got to benefit from women who were entrepreneurs and senior in their field. Really just give me a bunch of life advice, anything from like, how do you raise children in New York City to how do you deal with, I don't know, any kind of business thing. But, they are people that I've gone to and said, hey, listen, I'm starting this new thing. Can you connect me with your network? So the relationships that I built early on in my technology career have really come back to me manyfold. And that's been critical. Like, there's several founders from EdTech women who are like, just send me your deck. I'll send it to VCs, or like, can I send this to a friend? Or I know a school that could use this. And so it's really primarily from the social capital that I built when I first moved to New York 10 years ago.
That's cool. So has a lesson been that, maintaining those relationships is not only important, but it's paid off for you.
Especially as a convener. I think that's the critical point. Mm-hmm. If you are the convener bringing people together, that comes to you. And that really comes from my parents. Like, I swear to God, we had dinner parties every week. Like, I remember telling my mom, I was like, if we just charged everyone $5, we'd be like a millionaire by now. Like, it was tiring at the time, but my parents really understood the power of relationships. And I learned that from my families, like the power of relationships, the power of sitting down with someone, having a conversation, and really getting to know them. And I love people. The through line of my life is relationships. It's not technology. It's relationships. And so I just genuinely enjoy building it and getting to know what people are. Like, I'm the only person I think who loves wedding speeches. Every time we go to a wedding, like, I really love wedding speeches. And so I think that relationship building is just fun, and it has come back to me in a really nice way.
That's pretty awesome. Do you see that as something that, as you said, you have this intergenerational network? Do you see that focus on relationships and the way people have relationships with others? Do you see that changing or different between generations, only because the way we communicate is so different now? So the younger generation are more quick and instantaneous, whereas you had parents who were bringing people together and spending what it sounds like quality time, really getting to know one another. Just curious, as you say that, that's what I'm wondering.
I do think there is a difference. I mean, luckily, I think early childhood education is getting stronger. And I think that is all about relationships. It's about your caregiver and your friends and your play groups. I do think that we're losing it. I find it harder now to bring certain people together. Like, my expectations around just relationship building, not even friendship, is this, like, I'm committed. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And I think sometimes that isn't always what happens. And I think that it can be very transactional. I am hopeful that COVID will help change that. I do think people are more vulnerable now and more willing to show up as themselves. And I think that'll help a lot.
I would say that one of the silver linings, at least, that I found and my family found in dealing with the whole COVID pandemic, was that, again, to another theme we hit on earlier, but that idea of presence. Like, we as a family connected more often. It was, there was less going on, right? So there was more time to spend together, connected, focused in the moment. And I think in our society, that was almost kind of a needed little pause for a lot of people, because I think there is something to be said for that,
totally,
with multitasking and micro communications. And so pretty interesting stuff.
And to know yourself. Like, I spoke to a bunch of high schoolers last week, just trying to understand what their the impact of COVID was. And I was shocked that the rising juniors that I talked to were actually grateful. And one of the things they said was that they got to know themselves better. And I was like, floored.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow. I would love to hear a little bit about what your role looks like today as co-founder in Sleuth.
Yeah.
It sounds like you got, when you describe the team, it's you, Alex, and then you have a team that sounds like is on the technical side. And you said you're not technical founder. So my assumption is that leaves a lot of stuff up to you. So what does that look like?
Yep. It's trying to source and close distribution partnerships, collaborations with nonprofits, social service organizations, and saying, hey, listen, you're already helping serve families, and Sleuth can help you understand more what's happening in children's health within your constituency. It's on the user acquisition side, literally doing a bunch of unscalable outreach.
Yeah.
We had an unsolicited video testimonial the other day. And you think about that as like an outcome, that takes a lot of trust work, right? To go out and cultivate. It's like all about relationship cultivation. And relationship cultivation takes a lot of time. Mostly on the marketing front.
Yeah.
I do a lot of stuff on marketing.
What are some of the things on the marketing side that's given you guys the most traction to this point?
So Google Ads has been great. We have an amazing, our CPC is $1.90. It does confirm something that we've always known, which is that children's health is a great white space. The other bang for a buck is amplifying stories during a month of awareness. And reaching out to organizations that are trying to build that awareness. Like, we have the technology to help. And so we pair very well with an organization that's already connecting families. We come in with a thoughtful technology without competing with the community building. So we don't connect parents to each other right now. We're really focused on the information part. And so that gives us a leg up.
A comment that you made just a moment ago was you're focused on non-scalable activities. I certainly get that, but can you explain to other founders who are thinking, but I want to grow this business, I need to scale it. Why are you doing why are you spending so much time on non-scalable activities?
I'm spending time on non-scalable activities because of the trust. I really believe that we are successful when people trust us. And so that comes from building trust almost one by one. The other reason I do non-scalable activities is to find out where our fishing hole will be, right? So like, if I find small fishing holes on the same platform, then that informs how I create a scalable strategy. And so that will come. Also, parents talk to each other. The viral coefficient of parents is huge. So I have to start talking one by one in order for it to spread.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, but I think that's something that successful founders almost always share. You got to really get into the weeds and really know the inner workings, the nitty gritty. Before, to understand how to properly scale it, you have to understand really what's going on. The only way to do that is to dive in there and really be on the ground and talking to people and understanding and all that. So no, that's fantastic. We have a few minutes left. I just have a couple of questions left for you. First of all, I would love to hear, what is next for Sleuth? What does the next 12 months look like? And what's the vision for the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. So the next 12 months is continuing to collect parent stories and creating the deep analysis of those stories that lets parents know what to do next, almost like a personalized map. And that is part of our monetization strategy. So our first stage was proving that we could get a product that could drive traffic and parent contributions, and we accomplished that. The next stage is building out the product that we're going to monetize. In 3 to 5 years, we want to be at the point where people come to us and know us for all children's health. Right? It's like, we'll start chipping away at different categories, but we really are a broad children's health platform. And I want and expect that instead of people going to Google, they'll come to Sleuth first when they're searching for symptoms.
Very cool. I love that as an aspiration. It's fantastic. And before I ask you my last question I have for the day, tell our viewers, where they can learn more about Sleuth. and maybe follow, connect with you as well.
Yeah, sure. Our website is hellosleuth.com. Hello Sleuth is also our Instagram, which I manage, so you can connect with me there, or you can connect with me at Sehreen Noor Ali on Instagram too. So I manage both accounts. I would love to hear from folks. Awesome.
That's very cool. So, Sehreen, this has been fantastic. I just want to wrap up with the last question we typically ask on this show. It's, if you were to go back a few years prior to, meeting Alex, prior to making the decision to let's launch this business, you were to have a cup of coffee with your former self. What piece of advice would you give?
I would say don't waste your time feeling like you can't do it. Just a waste of time, and play the game. Like because I know what my long game is, just play the short game to get there.
I love it. I love how concisely you stated those, like with conviction. That's fantastic. That is awesome. Well, Sehreen, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure our viewers have really enjoyed this one.
Thank you for having me. This was super fun.
For sure, and continue to keep doing great and important work. We certainly wish you and Sleuth the best.
Thank you.
To our viewers, we will be back again next week at the same time. But thank you to everyone for joining here and watching today's show. Thanks a lot again, Sehreen, and take care.
Thank you. You too.